I think one of the guys that is the most pleasant surprise is Josh Dobbs. He's come out, he showed up a little bit. We've also seen David Bell flash a little bit coming off the injury. Defensive tackles are still a concern. And on top of that, Jimmy G is still a storyline in the background. We'll discuss that with John Kosko of Pro Football Focus coming up on the next Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound LGB on the LOB, the Locked On Browns podcast, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Garrett Bush, Jeff, Lloyd, your hosts of Locked On Browns. We appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen every single day, whether it is on your favorite podcast platform, of course, now on YouTube. The growth over there just continues. We appreciate everybody being along for the ride here as we take this show to the next evolution. As Garrett said, John Kosko of PFF in the house. We're going to go under the lens here from the Browns' Week 2 preseason game, 21-20 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. Certainly some good to take away from that we are going to get to. And then we'll get to the defensive side of the ball as well as the offensive side of the ball. A couple of questions for John here in segment 3 before we let him out of here. But John, it wouldn't be fair to start this episode without, talking about Josh Dobbs. And look, he really has not faced, basically truly NFL competition to this point yet. But I think one thing you're seeing here with Dobbs, and this is certainly, look, other teams have gone down this road. This is certainly something Browns fans we haven't seen, certainly since I've been covering this team, and certainly a lot longer. It is a team that's got as a guy at the quarterback position who's got the calling card of, hey, if nothing else is there, guess what? I've got legs. I can use them. And with a backup quarterback, look, you understand there's going to be deficiency in his game as far as a passer. So having that ability and being able to make plays that way, but to put together 2 nice outings like Dobbs did, and I for one thought when he was first brought here, oh great, this is a buddy signing. They both, he, Deshaun Watson, both have the same quarterback coach. Was this similar to Case Keenum being in here or something like that? Just somebody to be another voice, another person to bounce things off of for the starting cornerback. But for now, Josh Dobbs, he's done everything that is asked of them. And I certainly feel, I'm not ready. I don't want to hand the ball to him for 10 games. God forbid something happened to Jacoby Brissett. But we're getting closer and closer to the point where I feel less apprehensive about the fact that Josh Dobbs was ever going to have to take a rep for this team.
Yeah, he was with the Pittsburgh Steelers for 4 years, and obviously you get really well coached when you're there. He got to sit behind, obviously, the future Hall of Famer and Ben Roethlisberger to kind of learn as a backup quarterback in this league. And I think what you've seen from him, we know he's a smart guy, and how he can apply that to the field. He's running this Cleveland Browns offense efficiently during the 2 preseason games, obviously against preseason defenses. But you're talking about an offensive grade so far through 2 games of 87.3. He's really doing everything that you want him to do. He's got a couple of big time throws. When things break down, he can use his athletic ability to scramble and look good doing that. So really, he's kind of giving you what you're hoped for in your backup quarterback, that if push comes to shove, you can put him out there and not be at a big detriment. You're going to obviously be at a loss when you're putting in a backup quarterback over a starter, especially a guy that, when all is all said, he's your 3rd string quarterback, but he's a guy that's going to be able to at least efficiently run your offense and just execute it as you call it.
Sometimes people look at it as a detriment, and I understand that you want your quarterback to be able to stand in the pocket and throw the football when the pressure's on. But one thing that you have to look at, and if it's a quarterback that's a backup quarterback, if he's not going to be able to throw the ball as proficient as your starter, well, at least I want him to have something else he can hang his hat on if the play does break down. So for me, I've always said that I would like a backup quarterback. If he's going to be my backup, I understand that he's going to have some limitations throwing the football, but I also want some stuff that I can call that can give me a 2-way go, so to speak. in terms of his legs and moving around and making some first downs. And I think he did a good job of that against the Eagles, and has done a good job throwing the football as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you hit it right on the head with a guy that's a backup. He's not going to be as good at throwing the football, so he needs to have another thing to rely on. And teams, you look at the position as a whole for the quarterback, the quarterback position for the Cleveland Browns. They wanted to get more athletic there. That was pretty clear from this offseason. They obviously Deshaun Watson is a much more athletic quarterback than Baker Mayfield.
There's been a lot of talk, John, and deservedly so here about, basically the way this wide receiver room is going to break and shake down. The talk is not stopping. Everybody, veteran wide receiver, veteran wide receiver, veteran wide receiver, veteran wide receiver. It doesn't end. And look, it's got to be tough enough for these kids to understand that basically they're maybe being given a role that they're not ready for. So it's tough enough to, go down that road and then kind of struggle a little bit. Bell, there was time missed. Anthony, doing everything right, but the easiest part, which should be catching the ball. Michael Hartley getting an opportunity, making a couple of plays here. The growth of these guys, and it's paramount. And I'm assuming every one of those three is going to be in line for big playing time in this final preseason game, because the Browns are going to have to look at that Labor Day weekend, and there's going to be a lot of names that, could be available to come in here and help out this wide receiver core. And these guys got to do everything they can to basically, fight.
Obviously, when cut down time comes and there's going to be a lot of quality players available, it's going to be interesting to see what the Browns do if they add to the room. Obviously, losing Jakeem Grant is a big loss for, from the diversity that they wanted to have in that receiving room. But I think with Bell, he's a guy that we know that from a tape standpoint, and obviously the combine, he doesn't have the juice, the explosion that you'd want out of a modern day wide receiver, but he's a reliable route runner. Where he's going to be. He can find the soft zones and generally has good hands, even though he did drop a ball on Sunday. But I think with Bell, he's a guy that can be there and start day one and be a quality receiver. The Browns have an interesting situation in that wide receiver room. I think they want these guys to get a lot of playing time in preseason and in camp, and not have maybe a veteran wide receiver take away reps. And that's probably why what they're doing. And maybe when cut down come times, maybe they add another guy. But I think they want these guys to get as many reps as possible to see if they can develop and somebody, show up and say, hey, I this is my role and I'm taking it.
Yeah, I think the receiver position is going to be the talk of the town between that and the defensive tackle for the rest of the year, until somebody, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Schwartz, Bell, somebody has a big game and they put it back to back. They need a couple games in a row for people to stop kind of talking about it. I just think that, when you're doing roster building, we talked about this before, you can't have an all-star or a perennial Pro Bowler at every position. That's just not the way the game is set up. So I think that the Browns are content going into the season knowing that the wide receivers and defensive tackles may be something left to be desired.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't think it's a smart decision to be kind of like left to desired. I think obviously Amari Cooper is an excellent wide receiver, and so you got a really good number one. But you do definitely want just a better overall group. I think you've got to expect more from those guys, and especially if you're going to be out in 11 personnel more often now with the system that you're going to be running over the past couple of seasons. You need guys that can get open and be explosive in that game, because just look at down south in Cincinnati, that offense is going to be lighting up the scoreboard every single week. Joe Burrow is going to be slinging it to some studs on the outside and on the inside, and they got a really talented offense. So you've got to be able to hang with those types of guys, and the way to do it is to counteract that with also a really quality roster at the wide receiver position. And the Browns have a really good roster, and the weakness that they have is their wide receiver room depth, because after Amari Cooper, I mean, it's a lot of question marks, and you need these guys to step up, and they have shown ability, but they need to be able to show it consistently week in, week out.
Biggest issue there, obviously, is whatever we think Amari Cooper can be this year. These are guys who are going to get the targets early. What defensive coordinator in the world right now is going to say, all right, well, we'll just go one-on-one with Amari Cooper when Donovan Peoples-Jones is out there, David Bell is out there, Anthony Schwartz is out there. These guys are going to get their opportunities, because you'd be a fool if you're Carolina to not, make sure that you are, doing everything you can to shut down Amari Cooper week one. Big congratulations, Browns rookie defensive end Isaiah Thomas on the birth of his young daughter. We're going to get back here. We're going to flip it up to the defensive side of the ball here. John Kosko joining Garrett Bush and Jeff Lloyd on your latest Locked On Browns. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Ready? Delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite. Cookie dough chunk puffs have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, they are covered in 100% real chocolate. All the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it, plus it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories, and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. Run to Built.com, snag a box for you and the family. It will be the perfect treat, or you can find a really good hiding place and just hoard them all for yourself. What's great about Built is that all their bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something good and is good for you. You are going to love the new cookie dough chunk puff, whether you need a snack for your workout, a late night treat, or just to grab a quick bite. Built is the perfect protein bar, and they taste better than a candy bar. Ditch the calories, fat, and sugar. Grab yourself a Built bar. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKEDON15 and get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCKEDON15.
Welcome back to the Locked On Browns podcast. G. Bush in the building, Jeff in the building, and we got a good guest on the line, perennial guest here over the Locked On Browns podcast, John Kosko of PFF. First segment, we really talked about some of the offensive weapons that we saw. Had an opportunity to play David Bell amongst those guys, Anthony Schwartz, and of course, Josh Dobbs. We're going to pivot a little bit to the defensive side of the room, and we'll start with this, John. We mentioned the receivers. Defense, we got a couple guys we were spot shadowing. Perrion Winfrey was one of them. I think he had a 49% grade in the game against the Eagles, right?
45.7.
Okay, round up.
Who's keeping track, right?
Yeah, who's saying, So he had a low F. Like that means like if he had a test, he had to get 100% just to get a C. So that just put the perspective on how bad that was. When you look at this defensive line, obviously the strength is the defensive ends, the weakness is D tackles. Has anybody jumped out to you and said, hey, I deserve to start for the Cleveland Browns at defensive tackle?
No. Just flat out no. The highest graded defensive tackle in this game was Glenn Logan, 52.3. That just tells you everything you need to know about that position right there.
Well, he's the A of the room for the week, John. There's that at least.
Yeah, there's that, I suppose. So, you got Tommy Togiai, who's right behind him at 47.7. And like we said, Perrion Winfrey was at 45.7. I get it from a rookie standpoint. You're trying to figure things out. He's not a bigger dude. But, there's a reason why he went in, the fourth round on day 3. They're not investing high draft picks, a lot of money at that position. They're basically hoping that they can get these guys in the mid rounds and they can be average type of defensive tackles, because really an average defensive tackle is all that you need. The difference between an average one and a top tier one doesn't really add too many wins, but for them, they got their guys aren't performing. I think you go back to last week, they also didn't play very well. Taven Bryan played defensive tackle for them last week and was showed up at an average level, which is kind of what they're looking for. But you look at the rest of the guys, and Glenn Logan was a 55.8, Tommy Togiai was a 53.9. So they're not playing well. Jordan Elliott didn't play in this game. You would have hoped to see him after a 45.3 last week. So I think it's an issue for sure that they have, where these defensive tackles need to be a lot better. Again, are they going to make a move at the end of this preseason? Maybe, we'll see, because I think how can you rely on these guys if in preseason they're really struggling? Sometimes you can say, hey, there's hope because they're playing well in the preseason, but then these guys aren't playing well at all in the preseason, so they're going up against lesser offensive tackles and offensive guards and centers. Now they're going to go up against the starting guys, and those guys are much better, much more well coached, experienced and stuff like that, and they're going to get even more mauled. So I think it's an issue for sure.
If you're talking average, we're about 15 to 20 points away per grade from being average. So that appears to be, of course, the issue right there. I want to talk a little bit about Alex Wright. Week one definitely looked like, a rookie out there. I think this week against the Eagles played with a little bit more discipline, got more playing time early with Isaiah Thomas being out with the broken hand. It appears Isaiah Thomas is going to come back to practice this week with a cast on the hand. But for Alex Wright, and when this draft class had folded and was done, I said that maybe immediately there could be the path for Isaiah Thomas to have more playing time earlier than Alex Wright, because there was going to be a little bit of a learning curve with Alex Wright. Some more technique work was going to need to be done. At UAB, he basically did on the defensive line whatever they asked him to do, so they moved him around. He wasn't truly just a functional D end for his time down at UAB, but I think showed a little more discipline in run support. And it's going to be interesting, John, because this defensive end room is pretty deep. As we talk about the defensive tackle room, where there's certainly, it doesn't appear there's enough. This defensive end room is going to be interesting because there's, some guys here, if they do get cut, they will immediately be picked up by other teams. But maybe talk about maybe the growth here of Alex Wright and, maybe how important week 3 will be for a player like that.
Yeah, he definitely needs to show up, and he's going to make the roster for them, because you don't invest a third round pick on a guy and generally cut him in their first preseason. But I think he showed well in this game, right? Like you talked about the better run discipline. From this game, he was a 69.1, which I know sounds not great, but that's getting closer to average. And our scale is not a pure 0 to 100 where you have to get in the 90s to get like the A grade or a good grade. A good grade is generally in the 80s, and the average is in the 70s. So like he's barely a below average, game that he had from him. He had a couple of wins as a pass rusher, but he had 2 stops in the run game. And like you said, I think he played a better game, kept his feet a little bit more. He had, he's a guy that they're going to want to use on stunts, because that's what he was really effective at UAB. And in game 1, I think he was maybe caught off guard by maybe some of the speed and the strength of NFL offensive linemen. Showed better in this game. So I think he was just more prepared mentally to handle that, and it kind of showed. So I think good progress from week 1 to week 2. That's kind of what you want to see from these young defensive linemen for the Browns. Unlike the defensive tackles, Alex Wright kind of showed up and just played better.
Yeah, I thought he played with a little better pad level, a little better attention to detail. And like you said, I think overall for the defensive line, I think it's going to be something where, Joe Woods is going to have to, do certain things, right? There's more than one way you can skin a cat. Sometimes you can do it with just lining up because I'm better than you. Sometimes you can do it with, using it down and distance against the offense. And sometimes you have to manufacture some pressure or manufacture something to be able to stop the run. So I think that the defensive line, once Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney come back, it's a tremendous upgrade, because then you have 2 guys, especially Jadeveon Clowney, who are really good against the run. So I think that'll help you out a little bit. So for the D tackles, it's just like, please don't get blown off the ball. Just don't get knocked into the linebackers and the defensive ends. Hopefully they can continue to in spot shadow here or there with guys like Wright and Chase Winovich and those guys as well. Do you see any surprising cuts at the defensive end position, John?
So generally they're going to keep, obviously you're going to keep Myles, Clowney, Winovich, Wright. They probably will like Isaiah Thomas, unless he, his hand injury has lasting effects, and they might put him on the injured reserve for the year or something like that, so they can stash him on that. But I think Stephen Weatherly probably is a guy that's not going to make the team, I would say. Would be my first thought. And I think, Curtis Weaver might be a guy that might be on the outside looking in as well.
The dream is dead with Curtis Weaver, John. The dream is dead.
Yeah, it's this game he had a 59 grade. Did have a sack, but I think what you need from him is just more consistency that you'd like. I think from he was a PFF darling. He graded well at Boise State. I didn't really like his tape. I thought that he, from a body, he needed to kind of have a recomp in his body style.
Yeah,
for sure, because he needed just to, when he won, He's obviously going in at BSU. You're going up against lesser competition there than in Power 5. But I think like for him, there's when you grade that well in college, there's hope. If you can, maybe that can translate after a couple of seasons, as long as you're able to put the work in and maybe refine technique, get more explosive, something like that. But for him, I don't think it was ever in the cards for him based on just his athletic ability. Because I think he was just too slow of a player and just didn't have enough fast twitch muscle fibers to really get it going at the NFL level on a consistent basis. But yeah, the dream's dead.
John, Richard LeCounte, in my opinion, looked really active Sunday. And, year two, and there was obviously everybody knows how his Georgia career ended. And there were times last year, where the Browns had questions about, maturity, commitment. And probably which led to bringing Ronnie Harrison back. Basically, you had two players and said, look, you're both here. One is going to play specials. One is going to get to be a third safety. You two are basically ultimately decide who's going to do that. But for LeCounte, I thought it was, yes, he was a 5th round pick, but, he came from Georgia with a pretty good pedigree, pretty good background as far as being a playmaker. And I think, of the players the Browns put out there Sunday, he was the one kind of, looked like maybe he was the guy out there with guys that maybe he shouldn't necessarily have been playing with.
Yeah, so for him, he missed 3 tackles in this game. So his grade isn't going to maybe kind of reflect how active he was for sure. He was constantly around the ball. He had 6 tackles, 2 assists, but then he also had the 3 missed tackles. So you're talking about, and he was also targeted twice in the game. So he was constantly around the ball in this game on 52 snaps. His overall grade was a 57.9. When you miss 3 tackles, it kind of is going to tank your grade a bit and for a 1-game sample. So I think the encouraging thing is that he was around the ball a lot and being active and sticking his nose in there. So from a projection standpoint, I don't see missed tackles as an issue for him. Like you're not gonna miss 3 tackles every game. That's just not gonna happen. He might have some issues, where games pop up where it's just like he's missing tackles against maybe more athletic, quicker type guys. But for him, and for the Browns at that safety position, they need a third safety to really step up. Obviously Delpit and John Johnson, they're going to be your guys, but there's a reason why Ronnie Harrison was on the market for a while and then came back, was because we know what the issues are for Ronnie Harrison. He has some mental lapses in games. He's not the most athletic kind of a guy, but if he's on, he can be really good. And I think they're hoping for, LeCounte to kind of maybe supplant him and be that third safety for the Browns, because I think for Harrison, if you have mental lapses in games, that can lose you games. And you talk about losing games, you could arguably say that he lost in the game against the Chargers. He had a couple of big busts in that game. Early in the season, there were some busts that the Browns had, and he was at the center of them. So I think with LeCounte, it was encouraging to see that he was that active, and second leading tackler for the game for the Browns behind Jordan Kunazik. I can't pronounce his name, the middle linebacker who's probably not going to make the roster for them. So I think for him it was an encouraging game.
D'Anthony Bell, you think he's now on the outside looking in terms of making this roster?
I think he probably was all along. You're talking about an undrafted free agent from West Florida. And most people won't even know what their mascot are. They're the Argonauts. So I think of course, everybody knows that, right? I guess
big Argo fan.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he's probably on the outside looking in. That might be a surprise roster make. I think he's through 2 games in the preseason, and one thing that we don't see it from the outside looking in, how they do weekend, day in, day out in practice, and what they're being able to pick up in practice, and the opportunities you get in a game are very few, especially at the safety position where you might never get targeted in that game. So your grade is kind of reliant on maybe a few plays. Overall grade is relying on a few plays. So I think with D'Anthony Bell, I think he shows good ability out there. He's got good size, but I think he's probably on the outside looking in.
Well, the other thing with Bell is if you're going to come into a camp as a 24, 25-year-old rookie, you better look like you know what you're doing. And at least for, D'Anthony Bell, that looks to be the case. He doesn't look like a 21-year-old where he has no idea what's going on. We'll see if it works out for him. But, and now this is weird to say because, years ago, these types of players would get cut and would come to Cleveland. But now Cleveland's in the position where they're going to cut these players. And most likely they're going to be able to find a home somewhere else. Garrett Bush, Jeff Lloyd with John Kosko. We're going to get to a little bit more here. A couple questions for John before we let him go. Appreciate everybody makes Locked On Browns their first listen every day, whether it's on your favorite podcast platform or, of course, now on YouTube.
Back at it on Locked On Browns podcast. Make sure you hit that that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you get all of the Locked On Browns podcast and continue to support on a podcast platform. Wherever you get your podcast, you can download it. And thanks for making Locked On Browns your first listen of the day. John, we kind of wrap this thing up, give you a couple questions on the way out of here. We've talked about, Cade York, a lot. I don't know, kickers are the dime a dozen now. What are your thoughts? Do you think Cade York can become kind of like, in the mix? Because one of the things that we look at the AFC North is we got kickers galore. They don't be missing. McPherson, obviously, you got with the GOATs to meet myself down there in Baltimore. What do you think about Cade York and his game? 51 make, 55 miss.
55 miss is kind of like you're almost not expected to make that. And then if you do, it's a big time bonus for the offense, obviously. So I think with York, we know he has a big leg, and it's a matter of can he hit those in the clutch type situations and generally make most of your kicks. I think as a rookie, we'll see. I'm not an expert on evaluating kickers by any means. Essentially just make your kicks and you're good to go, right? But I think there was a quote that he said that he doesn't really have a base kicking swing or something like that, which to me is a little concerning because like if you think about like a golf swinger, he has a base swing a repeatable swing that he uses every time, and then if he has to vary off that, he's gonna do that based on the conditions or something like that. And if York said he's like, I'm just a field kicker, so like whatever feels good, I'm gonna do it in a moment or something like that. I think that can get you in trouble. I think if you look at Justin Tucker, he probably has the same repeatable swing every single time, and he knows exactly what his ball is going to do every single time. So I guess from does he have a base swing type thing, what his quote is, that's a little concerning to me, I'd say.
Interesting. It's certainly interesting. John, I got to stop tweeting sometimes at night, but last night, this talk about the Browns moving on from Kareem Hunt. You were without your top quarterback and who we feel is a top 5, top 7 quarterback in the NFL for the first 11 games of the season. Whether you want to get into whether or not Kareem Hunt is your number 2 or your number 3 playmaker, we're not going to get into that. But moving on from Kareem Hunt, when you were already going to deal with such a significant loss on the offensive side of the ball here, explain to me how that could even become close to being a smart idea. Yes, Jerome Ford has looked good, but the whole intention of Jerome Ford was we like him. We're going to get him now. Ideally, we really aren't going to use him much till 2023. How do you move on from somebody who is such a solid dual threat running back and you desperately need, what is the rationale that could make any sense there to move on from him now other than maybe just appeasing him?
It's would be the cap savings of $6 million because I don't think he's owed, if you cut him or even if you just cut him, I don't think he's owed anything, and you can trade him and obviously you don't owe him anything. So that would be the
but he's going to earn his $6 million. It's not like he's not going to earn the $6 million.
Well, so that would say that the biggest reason, right, is to save the $6 million to be able to roll it over, and maybe you're using that $6 million to sign another, a veteran wide receiver or something like that. That would be the reason to do anything like that, where if you're losing him, you're replacing him with a guy at the wide receiver position or a guy at defensive tackle that's going to help your team in some sort of way. Because Kareem Hunt, I would say, is arguably their best running back, arguably. And I think everybody loves Nick Chubb, and he's a great running back in his own right, but he's limited when it comes to receiving game. Kareem Hunt can do it all for you. So I think we saw, the how effective this team can be when both those guys are healthy and they don't generally be on the field together, but they're able to spell each other and how effective the team is with each other. So they, I get it from a running back position. Like, I'm not a guy that likes to pay running backs a lot of money because they don't move the needle as much as receivers and obviously quarterbacks and even tight ends. But I think he's a dynamic player that's probably the best in that room. And isn't it? You probably drafted Jerome Ford to replace him eventually, but you probably don't want to do it just so quickly, because I think what you saw at Jerome Ford this weekend is that he showed some rookie mistakes, especially one in pass protection. A guy like Kareem Hunt's not going to make those types of mental mistakes in pass protection. Jerome Ford needs to kind of figure that out, and it's hard for rookies to do that, especially at that position.
Just want to thank John for coming on in here today. We got to the offensive side of the ball here. Josh Dobbs starting to look more and more like the part here, and most likely going to be the number 2 here for the first 11 games of the season. Development, Alex Wright, some other players on the defensive line, and the question we've all had since free agency started, the defensive tackle position, it still exists, folks. Then of course, Kareem Hunt's future with this team. Garrett Bush hosts the Old Cleveland Sports Show. Of course, the Barbershop 92.3 The Fan Saturday mornings, and many other opportunities. Make sure you check all that. Check out Garrett's other work at GBush91. Make sure you're following. John, been with PFF forever. By far, always been one of the biggest segments and one of the biggest guests that this show does, as we put it under the lens after each and every Browns game. At John Kosko 3, myself, Jeff Lloyd, at Jeff_LJ_Lloyd. The show at Locked On Browns. Follow back account. DMs are open wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're following, subscribe to the Locked On Browns podcast. Of course, now on YouTube. The growth there continues. We appreciate that mightily. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you got your notifications on, so as soon as the latest content drops, it is there for you. Last week of preseason here for the Browns. We'll cover this, obviously, from the top to the bottom up until Saturday night, 7:30, when the Browns kick it off. As always, again, thank you everybody for being along for the ride. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. LGB on the LOB. Let's go Browns.